Welcome to our Daniels Faculty Winter 2021 Lectures and our Talk Series. We are pleased to once again welcome our 2020-21 Frank Gehry International Visiting Chair in Architectural Design, Douglas Cardinal. Robert Levitt, our Associate Dean Academic, will introduce Douglas shortly, but first, I want to acknowledge our land and donors. I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Daniels honors Indigenous peoples past, present, and future here and around the world, and we wish to pay respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you are joining us virtually today. Named in honor of the Frank O. Gehry, this endowed chair brings a highly recognized international architect to the Daniels faculty to deliver a public lecture and enrich the students' learning experience each year. Heather Reisman, founder of Indigo Books and Music, and 45 other donors established a $1 million matched by U of T grant to establish the chair in November 2000. It is named for the Toronto-born designer of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, the Experience Music Project in Seattle, and the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. Now over to our host, Robert Levitt.
Thanks, Rob. This event is the final event in a series of 4 lectures that have taken place this winter. Throughout these events, we have delved into the work and life of our honored 2020-2021 Frank Gehry International Visiting Chair in Architectural Design, Douglas Cardinal. Douglas Cardinal is one of Canada's most celebrated architects. His St. Mary's Church in Red Deer, which he presented in his first lecture, and his museums in Canada and Washington, D.C. rank among some of this country's proudest contributions to the architectural canon. His advocacy for human and Indigenous rights has been central to his life's work, as is his uncompromising commitment to design. He's an officer of the Order of Canada, an RAIC Gold Medal recipient, and the recipient of more than 20 honorary degrees, including one from the University of Toronto. But more importantly, he's the inventor of a singular architectural language that has drawn from his life experiences and from the unique figures in his education. His work uses an organic idiom that draws inspiration from many sources. To name a few, from the rolling landscapes of the Alberta prairies where he was raised, from the expressionist architecture of such figures as Rudolf Steiner, whose work he encountered during his studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and from his encounters with the work and person of Frank Lloyd Wright. Tonight's talk will be an in-depth discussion of Douglas Cardinal's design for the Canadian Museum of History. An important part of Pierre Elliot Trudeau's project of Canadian nation building, the museum was created to enshrine all of the cultures of Canada. The museum is rich in symbolism and unique in its eloquent use of curves. It is the most visited building in Canada, with more than 1 million visitors each year. It is consistently chosen as a stage to host world leaders visiting the nation's capital on official business. I'd also like to add that it is our intention to supplement tonight's lecture with a video tour of the museum that Mr. Cardinal will conduct once the museum is reopened. That is to say, after we're all vaccinated. This lecture and video tour will be combined into a single archival document to be made available to the public through the Daniels at a future date, really as soon as we are able to access the museum again. During this evening's discussion and afterwards, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will answer questions from the Q&A at the end of the event. So please join me in welcoming Douglas Cardinal tonight. And thank you for attending. Douglas.
Oh, thank you. This project was a vision of Pierre Elliot Trudeau, who created a separate Crown corporation called Canada Museum Construction Corporation to select the architect and to follow through as the project managers for the design. They were given a budget by Pierre Elliot Trudeau, and all the consultants, including myself, signed a contract with the corporation. And this corporation was answerable to Prime Minister Trudeau. And so he was in charge of the project. So the concept of this, as I'm presenting to you, was also presented by Pierre Elliot Trudeau to the cabinet. So it combines both of our thoughts together. So it is a lasting expression written in stone of multiculturalism with Indigenous voices to welcome all in the land that is Canada. An organic architectural expression to inspire museums around the globe. From the ocean emerged land and the spines of mountain ranges forming the backbone of our continent. In time, the sun, wind, and water molded the jagged rock forms into smooth, curved, sinuous forms of the Canadian Shield foothills and the plains. The action of these elements eroded the jagged rock forms and created sand and soil from which emerged the flora and fauna. A culture grew entwined with the forces of nature. Humans found their roots in nature and were conscious of being part of the chain of life. And that sculpture is Bill Reed there from the Haida Nation. And that expresses his culture. Next. Every living thing had a spirit, and the humankind was entwined with all the spirits of all of the living beings. From the oceans up the rivers and across the land came people of the diverse cultures from all over the world, drawn to the beauty and bounty of the land. Our future is optimistic and should be celebrated. The Natural Treasure House must welcome the people, teach them, inspire them, and send them away enlightened and optimistic about the future. That we are progressing as human individuals and as a nation. So the site is a historic site that is featured on the $1 bill, and that's the view from this particular site. And so that's why Trudeau chose that site across Parliament. And you can see, I saw Parliament as a very organic design made out of stone and copper, and I used the same materials for the museum, but a different artistic expression. And of course, the Ottawa River, and is, as you see, there are 4 rivers in the 4 directions. And for the Anishinaabe people from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains, this was always a sacred site. And that's why Queen Victoria chose it as the capital, because it was always the capital of our Anishinaabe nations. And the river is a beautiful river, and it has spiritual significance to all Anishinaabe people, as I said, from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains. And it's a very sinuous river flowing across the land. And Trudeau loved canoeing along the river. Here you see in his birch bark canoe, and the jacket that he was given to him by the Algonquin elder William Commanda. Next. So he had a special relationship with the water, and he understood the building. He always told me, I understand what you're doing, because I see when I canoe in the water, I see how the water works, and I see how you designed the building around the water. And so he always felt that the design was something that suited his wishes. So I've got the vision of the building from a lodge, ceremonial lodge with the elders. And the elders told me, you have to understand, you're the grandchild of all the generations before you, you're the grandfather of all the generations after. Within you is the past, present, and future. You have to understand that when you walk on the site, the building is already there. It's just in the future. Your job is just to unconceal it. And so I did sketch the overall form of the building and walking on the land. And there I put together a preliminary design in the competition, along with the thoughts and ideas from the elders and how it should come together on that particular site. It's gone through an evolution, of course, but that was the winning entry. What happened is they chose 80 architects to compete, and there was narrowed to 12, and that 12 was asked to present a design. And having won the competition, George McDonald there gave me a whole program of what should happen on the inside, of course. And he wanted me to have to be a ceremonial occasion. So he knew that I was a pipe carrier of our traditions, and he's an anthropologist. So he wanted that ceremony. When he gave me the whole program of requirements, we had a pipe ceremony. And that design, of course, had to evolve and change to suit the inner workings of the museum. So in laying out the museum with the corporation, we had evolved the building from the inside out. So the overall feeling of the site had to remain the same as what Trudeau approved as the winning entry, but it kept evolving in the design because I had 15 agencies that I had to approve it. And Trudeau put them all on the board of the corporation so that they'd make sure that they would push their departments to approve whatever the corporation presented them. And after all, he was the head of the corporation. But he hired Gene Sutherland Boggs, who was who used to run the gallery and was a personal friend of Pierre Elliot, and she ran the corporation. And so I had to go through this evolution with the corporation and the 15 departments that had to be involved in the project. So I involved them and through their feedback, and I kept evolving the design until I got their approval. And when I got their approval, I got a call from Trudeau, and he said, now you've met all the approvals of all these people, and you are to come to my office immediately, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, with all your models and drawings. And so we spent all morning together, 3 hours. He wanted to know everything about the design and all the detail. He was following it through on the sidelines with the corporation, and really putting a lot of pressure on everybody to proceed because he wanted it to happen immediately. And so he said, bring everything, we'll talk all morning, and then I'll bring in the cabinet and we'll approve it today. So that whole process took about 5 months. And then, he brought in the cabinet, and he presented the design to the cabinet and every detail of it. And then he said, well, we're going to approve this today because we have to start construction. And they said, Prime Minister, we never budgeted for this. There's no budget for this project. He said, well, I don't know. I was thinking this over, and you know, we have all these ships and armaments that we're building because we're trying to defend ourselves from Russia. And Russia is not a real challenge. They're not going to even survive, you know, with their economic system. And that was, I guess, Gorbachev was there at the time, but they were going through a lot of problems themselves. And he said, what I'm going to do is take a frigate for the Minister of Defense's budget, and I'm going to put it on the Ottawa River. And the Minister of Defense said, well, we made commitments, Prime Minister, we can't do that. And he said, I don't want all this money to go to a ship that rests in some far off sea somewhere. It's no good to anybody, particularly the people of Canada. He said, go look at the model again and choose. Do you want a frigate resting in some far off sea somewhere? Or do you want a national museum on the Ottawa River? And so he said, go and look at the model intently and then come back to me. And what is your opinion? And Minister of Defense came back after seeing the model and talking with me a little while about the design. And then he said, you're right, Prime Minister. We can dispense with one frigate. And he says, good. So it's all approved? And the whole cabinet said, yes, Prime Minister. He said, good. And then he walked out of the meeting, and I was in his office at the time with the model. And because he didn't bring the model in the cabinet room, he asked people to come back and see the model. And there he said, okay, now it's approved. You're to start construction tomorrow. I said, Prime Minister, it's all just schematic drawings and a little bit of design development. And I mean, it would take a long time to put this together. He says, this is a democracy. He said, you know, it might not happen if it doesn't start tomorrow. So, so you're to start construction tomorrow. I'm really not listening to any problems. I mean, I think they can be solved. You're going to start construction tomorrow. So I had to fast track the project. We had a project manager, and we had put together the contract documents as quickly as possible. So I of course developed a computer technology at the time, and so we used a computer because I not only had to do the architectural drawings, I had to do the, none of my consultants were on the computer, so I had to also do their drawings as well, the structural, mechanical, electrical drawings. I had to do all the work on the computer. And we had a chart where the construction manager laid out when he needed the drawings, and I had to have all the drawings to meet his schedule and his budget. So we were one step ahead of him. Like, we put out the piles, then the pile caps, and then the columns, and then the slabs. They're all separate documents, and we layered them all because everything was done on the computer. And this is the technology at the time. This was 83, 84, before AutoCAD, before any other computer technology. What I did was go down to Texas, and we had and I talked to you about that. I had the Texans develop me software for computer, and we got Hewlett Packard to give me the hardware. And so, so that was all realized by the computer. Also, I had to do the shop drawings for all the steel because I had to give everybody dimensions on the job because all the dimensions were on the computer, and therefore I had to give all the trades, all the dimensions on the job. And so all of these trades required all these drawings from me and all the dimensions. And so we had all these series of contracts, and we were one step ahead of the contractors. And so what happened was we had to develop the contracts, put them out for tender, do value engineering, modify the contracts. And then after that contract was finished, we had to do as-built drawings so that the next contractor could build on top of that. So we were working night and day on the computer to produce the drawings. Like I had a very creative engineer on steel, but not a creative engineer in concrete. So I had to do a lot of the work in steel, like this, all this hall had to be done in steel because my engineer was most creative in steel and not very creative in concrete. So, and then I had to do all the shop drawings so they could manufacture it because it was all in curves. So I had this amazing team to the left. That's my architectural team. And then to the right is my team of consultants. My partner was the president of the constituency for Marc Lalonde, and Marc Lalonde was in charge of all the political patronage for the province of Quebec. And so I was given a whole team, and my partner was the president of the constituency for Marc Lalonde, and all my engineers were from Montreal. And there's a top architect there with me, Michel Languedoc from Montreal. And there you can see a picture of Bill Reid, who's an amazing sculptor. And the reason why we have West Coast image in the Grand Hall is that the English community wanted to be in the Grand Hall, and the French community wanted to be in the Grand Hall. And they were arguing who should be in the Grand Hall to represent Canada. So they both agreed to have the First Nations to be in the Grand Hall rather than the other one. And so that worked for the president of the museum because George MacDonald was an anthropologist who got his whole education in West Coast culture. So he was a promoter of West Coast culture, and Bill Reid created all these images, and Trudeau put one of his sculptures in the embassy in Washington, which he chose Arthur Erickson for. So he loved Bill Reid's work, and that was good. Trudeau approved that as well. So the First Nations were in the Grand Hall. And then Trudeau wanted what he created, Boulevard Canada, to create a ring around the river there. And he wanted all the national buildings, the public buildings, to be in this circle. And so that it would include Quebec. It would primarily, all the bureaucracy was more British, and there was very little bureaucracy that had French-speaking people in it at the time. It was mostly English and very few Quebecers, but Trudeau wanted it to be recognized Quebec, and so he had this circle, whereas the previous capital had a big mall in front of the capital, and it was filled with boxes, and they lost the mall design as the nation's capital. So he recreated, and that was part of that, Confederation Boulevard, which is a circle that was to join England, the English side and the French side and the indigenous islands. So then working out all the details on the inside, there's 3 levels, and there's 2 levels, and then a change of levels. So you can see on this design. That over? No. There is a main corridor that goes from the curatorial section. I divided the building into 2 with a break in the middle. And there's this corridor that connects all the artifacts and all the storage and everything to the exhibit halls through that corridor, that artifact corridor. And then there's a huge elevator that goes up to serve the levels of the museum. So all the workings of putting together the exhibits and the cases and everything else is at the curator's end, and then it's taken over underneath there. So it's really one large complex, but out of the ground, I've made it into 2 buildings and separated them because I wanted a portico so that everybody could see that wonderful view of the Parliament and the library there. So Trudeau really liked that I created a portico. Now, most of the buildings that are created in Hull just separate the French and English. What I wanted to do was join them together through this portico to have a plaza on the French side, and also the Francophone community used this as a park. And so I wanted them to be able to walk right through the whole complex to the river, so everybody on the Quebec side would have access to the river. It wouldn't be locked off. At night or any time of the day, they could go to the river, and that would be open. The building would form a portico to the river. So then I had to design the curator's place to I put the offices on the outside and all the collections on the inside, because I had to protect all the artifacts. These are all the nation's treasures. And if there is a problem of a power or anything in the building, it would take a while for the artifacts to to change temperature, because I had I had offices on the outside, and I had layers of walls before the wall of the that housed all the artifacts, because I couldn't have any cold walls, because I would get stratification of air in the collections, which would cause problems in protecting the artifacts. I had to have the same conditions as an operating room: 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% relative humidity, pure air. That's an air sweep system that sweeps out any bacteria throughout. That was required. And so this is underneath, this is above the ceiling. This is all the technology there that it took. My engineers in Quebec didn't have that training. So I asked the Prime Minister if I could have, it's very nice I have this cast of thousands from Montreal, but can I have somebody that knows what they're doing? By all means. So I went to Philip Johnson in New York, who was always very supportive of me, and he put my work in the Museum of Modern Art, my church and college, and my work. And he gave me his team from New York. So I had the top New York team to do all my engineering, but they provided me the concepts. So then I provided them, my engineers, these concepts to carry out, because they weren't trained with all these concepts. So not only that, is that the museum has this environment, same environment as an operating room throughout to protect the artifacts, but we're heating and cooling the building with the river water. We've taken the river water that you can see in that elevation. And by the river, there's a building. You can see that curved building there. It has a pipe about 18 inches, a huge pipe of water that takes the river water into the building. And then we have a heat pump that takes the calories out of the river, out of the water. And so in taking the calories out, we have hot water and then we have cold water. And so we pipe that hot and cold water throughout the museum so we can either heat the space or cool the space depending on what the computers tell these whole systems to do. So it's a very complex system, and it was really never done before and all done by computer. We had to create the computer technology to be able to have it all run by computer, because you see, we have to maintain the temperature. If you have huge crowds come in, they give off temperature and humidity, and there's sensors in the building that go back to the computers, and the computers then the whole space is designed with a series of mixing boxes that mix the temperature and the humidity before it gets into the space, so that we have to control all the air in the space in that manner. And even the gallery itself, when I go through it, I can show you. So there was it was for the public, and we had an opening of the museum, and all the guests were all heads of state as time went on. And Mulrooney opened the building. But Mulrooney was totally against the project because he wanted the money to be spent in Quebec and Baie-Comeau, which is where he comes from. And so he wanted to take away some of the budget of the museum. And so he informed the corporation. He fired Gene Boggs from the corporation and installed a public works minister in charge of the corporation. And then he directed the corporation to take the stone off the building, because we hadn't put stone yet. It was just at that time, Trudeau took a walk in the snow and he felt there was, we had 5 cranes on the job, and he felt, okay, I can resign now. And it's, I'm going to give the next government a fait accompli. So the next, Mulrooney was totally against it. So, but Joe Clark stepped in, because I was always on the plane with because I was doing the project in Edmonton, and all the West is conservative. So I was always on the plane with them going back and forth to Ottawa, and they were all from Alberta, and they were really excited that I was doing the museum. So when Mulrooney wanted to totally change it, Joe Clark and Flora MacDonald, who were ministers of the government, very prominent ministers, took over Trudeau's dream and said, we'll make it happen. And so, if it wasn't for Joe Clark and Mazankowski and Harvey Andre and all those Western conservatives, we wouldn't have had it complete. So Trudeau got his dream with the support of the leader of the opposition during his reign, because Joe Clark was Minister of External Affairs, and he could understand the significance of the building internationally. So we had a great party at the opening, but Mulrooney had to open the building, even though he really was upset about it, and that I didn't follow his direction. And he said that I'd never do a building in Canada again because I didn't follow his direction. And he decided to hang me out to dry totally for all the money that at that particular time was owing to me, which was some $900,000. In order to finish the project, I put all my assets and my land and my house out west, everything I had, to the bank, and they lent me the money because my team cost me about $100,000 a year. I mean, it's $100,000 a month or more, and I had to complete the project. So, so at the end, he hung me out to dry for all my assets for going against his will in doing the museum. But at the opening, he called me in. He called to see me in the Grand Hall, and he was standing in the middle of the Grand Hall. And he said, for this marvelous space, he says, I truly exonerate you. And I said, thank you, Prime Minister. But his bureaucrats didn't, they never honored me at all. They hung me out to dry for everything I had. So I had to give my staff all notice, and so I lost my whole team in the project. And they were amazing, and their careers went on with other architects. So we were also to design public spaces on the outside. That's part of the design, to create a park-like setting for all the Francophones that wanted to use it as part of Hull. And also it had to have walkways, and it had to have the bicycle paths and everything. It had to be part of the whole around the mall. And then Trudeau gave me a whole bunch of things that he wanted. He'd always be talking to me. Well, of course, you've seen the Spanish staircase in Rome. I mean, I would really like that. He had traveled all over the world and visited so many museums. So he was telling me all the things that he wanted. And then I said to him, well, Prime Minister, I hadn't had time to travel. He said, why? I said, I've been fighting your policies for 10 years on Native rights. He says, well, you've got to see these buildings. So he had Jean Sutherland Baugh take me on a world tour to visit all the places that he wanted me to, that he was talking about having me incorporate. And that is my version of the Spanish staircase in Rome. And because Mulrooney wouldn't even invite him to the party, I asked the president of the museum if I could have a party to invite Trudeau, because after all, he was the one, it was his vision and it was his dream. And there you can see I have a large overhangs over the main entrance so that anybody coming up their cars would be under a canopy, so when they'd get off, they wouldn't be in the rain. So I wanted the building not only to protect the people inside, but also protect the people on the outside as well. And so it has large cantilevers over the plaza and over the main entrance for the cars and for people coming in and walking in the facility. And part of the concept is cross-referencing of where the halls open into other halls so that you can look from one hall to another hall. And the Prime Minister really wanted that because he saw that in some of the museums. He saw that in the Louvre, he saw that in the British Museum, and he wanted that in this, so I had to incorporate those concepts for him. So in the temporary exhibit hall, it has same conditions, but on the walkway to the exhibit hall, there's a glass corridor on one side so you can see into the grand hall. But not only that, there we can hang projectors and project images into the scrim of the grand hall, spiritual images and everything like that. We haven't incorporated that yet, but somebody will incorporate that in the future. And so we had to make sure to have complete security. I mean, we have amazing security in that, where because we have all the nation's treasures there, and then we have the same criteria that all international museums have for traveling exhibits, so that exhibits from any museum in Europe could be safe in traveling here and be protected, and also have the same environmental conditions. So we can have exhibits here from any museum in the world, because we have conditions that will protect the exhibit and also have the same conditions of protecting the artifacts. And also we have a children's museum, which really delight the children. This allows families to come and their children could go and play in the children's museum, and there are people that babysit them and look after them while their parents can exhibit and go and see all the rest of the exhibit, which is boring for the kids. So, and we also have theater and a broadcast facility, because the museum wanted to broadcast at 1,000 points in the museum. You can broadcast by satellite to anywhere in the world. So you can see that the theater there is also a broadcasting studio. And this is where the prime ministers were debating with the opposition and for the election, because from that theater you can broadcast by satellite to anywhere in the world. Actually, Mulroney contributed that because Mila wanted to have a meeting with Barbara Bush, and because together they were involved in an International Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and she wanted a place to be able to have that celebration and broadcast it around the world. And I said to her, if your husband would approve, the technology that I have on this building, then I'll have it done for your special broadcast. So she convinced her husband that would do it. So Mila was the one that put all this technology into the museum. And there's 5,000 miles of fiber optics in this building. There's 1,000 universal communication outlets that are all home runs to one big panel, so that we can put facilities at both ends so that we won't have obsolescence with the network. So, and that is used now for security. It's used for a lot of factors. Here we also have an IMAX, as you saw in the previous screen, and an Omnimax put together. And that's all on part of the exhibit as well, because that's Canadian technology. The actual the projectors cost $2 billion themselves, that whole thing. So that's the only IMAX, Omnimax. If you're going to spend that much for a projector, you better have IMAX and Omnimax. So we have that where the IMAX contained a 7-story screen can go into the lower floor, and a big screen, as you see on the roof there, can come down over, and you can project in the screen, so you can have your projection all around you. So it's the only theater that has IMAX and Omnimax in the same theater. And so we have these sculptures in the 4 directions. There's one on top of the entrance. and that space is used for the public. People find a whole bunch of reasons to use this space for the public. Now, the Grand Hall, you see, actually, initially, they had the whole place into an exhibit hall. So you're looking down at all a bunch of roofs, West Coast roofs, and that's pretty boring. So I asked George if I could change that into a public space and move the whole exhibit so that the roofs are actually under the roof of the second floor. Because roofs are boring anyway, and why not see the house fronts and have a space for celebration and for celebrating all the cultures of Canada, and make the West Coast Village into one big stage, and have it be that a lot of the stage sets and everything are behind in the buildings. And so at the end of the Grand Hall, I have a dome that leads you up to the History Hall, because as you go up the stairs, you can see Parliament and everything and the whole history of all the buildings along the river there. So I wanted them to be an extension of the history. But on the low floor, I have the First Peoples Hall. And they didn't want me to be involved in the First Peoples Hall because they felt politically but I was involved in the Canada Hall and did all the what do you call, contract documents for all that exhibit. And it's a walk through exhibit of scale buildings, all about the settlers, starting from the settlers. So that's all that government would approve at the time. That history started from first contact with Europeans, and that Canada was a settler culture. It did not include First Nations at all. First Nations were relegated to their own hall. And I was involved with it overall to make sure everything worked, but not in the design of it. So, so the new director, Mark O'Neill, who is a good Irish Catholic, and he decided that he would rewrite Canadian history, and he got cultures right across Canada, including First Nations culture, to rewrite Canadian history. The good, the bad, the ugly, but the truth. A lot of good, but some of it's pretty ugly when it comes to First Nations. So then he wanted all the history of Canada starting from at least 10,000 years ago. That included all First Nations cultures. So he asked me if I would be the architect for that. And he convinced this government, although I was blacklisted by all the bureaucrats because they didn't like me to, they didn't like Trudeau's precedent of taking it right out of Public Works and making it into taking it and making it into a separate crown corporation and build the building of the museum and the gallery with that corporation. So in this, I had to put a whole different history hall in a building that was already designed for earthquake design. So I had to, it was like building a ship in a bottle. The museum still had to continue while I was building that whole, while I was designing that whole history hall. And it was also done also through construction management. And we had a budget, which of course we met, like we met the budget of the museum. We met the budget of the History Hall. And so it was a challenge. And so I was very much involved in the whole design of the History Hall and putting it together. The contract documents were also, I worked with Moriamo, who was selected because they couldn't sole source me for everything. It's against the Government of Canada's protocol. So it was opened by Prince Charles and his wife. And it was a big celebration of Canada Day, and we had to be on time and have it all completed by July the 1st on Canada Day that year that we opened it. And so there was a big crowd there, and Prince Charles opened the building. When he liked the museum, he and Diane, I gave Diane a tour, spent a day with Diane and her children at the time. She wanted to spend a whole day with her children in the Children's Museum and the museum itself. So Prince Charles was very much aware that's a different kind of building. And he really liked the building itself. We had a lot of discussions because he's an architectural buff. So also Mark O'Neill, a lot of times when they hired architects, they were making changes to the design. And Mark O'Neill decided that I should write a whole book about the principles of design so that any architect hired to do work in the museum would have to follow the design principles. He got the idea from Australia, from the architect who had to rewrite the whole principles of design when he didn't finish the job. But the museum always is changing and being modified because it's always a living project, always. So Trudeau did not present the museum to Montreal or to Toronto. He did not open the design and present it to the public in Montreal, in Ottawa, because there was such a lot of opposition to me doing the museum because of my background. So he got his friend Jacques Chirac to have a pavilion at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, and he had the museum design and everything presented in Europe, in Paris. And so the first design was presented in Paris to the public. And then, with good press, he presented to Montreal and Toronto because the establishment architects were totally against me doing this building at the time. And they tried everything to have the design changed. So thank you very much. Thank you. This is a tour of the museum and the challenges I faced during the project.
Thank you so much, Douglas. That was a fantastic story. Lots of things I'm sure are not widely known in those accounts. I had a question for you. Because you've built two museums in both in two capitals, one in Ottawa and one in Washington D.C. They have somewhat different characters and missions, and I had a question for you about that difference. In the case of the Museum of History in Canada. It's meant to be a museum of the history of all the nations of Canada, or its entire history. And in the case of the U.S. Capitol, it's the Museum of the American Indian. And I wonder if I mean, I know that there are many vexing stories about the museum in Washington, D.C., but I wonder if there's anything that what you might think about the somewhat different missions of these two different museums, one that is more specifically focused and one that is more broad in its, I suppose, as you described it, kind of a nation building project along with Trudeau's vision.
Well, my elders out west were very strong and powerful elders. In fact, they ended up by going to the Pope and was very concerned because Trudeau was establishing symbols of nationhood. He wanted a constitution to enshrine our rights, a museum to enshrine our arts, like the gallery, and a museum to enshrine all the cultures of Canada. He said those are three symbols of nationhood. So he had a different agenda. The one in Washington is a National Museum for the American Indian. And although I worked with the elders, not only in Canada here, but in the United States, and I had very powerful elders who went to see the Pope. And indeed, it was, which Pope was it? Pope John Paul, the Polish Pope. And anyway, my elders went to see him and said, we're not going to be included in the Constitution as Indigenous people. And as someone who is very concerned about human rights, Pope John Paul said, "What? That can't happen." And with my elders right there, he just got on the phone and he phoned, "Pierre, this is John Paul. I have a native delegation here that says that you're not going to include Indigenous rights in the foundation, in the Constitution." And Trudeau says, "If I do, I'll lose my home province of Quebec. They won't sign." And the Pope says, "Well, so be it. You've got to do the moral thing." And Pierre said, "I know, and I'm going to put Indigenous rights in the Constitution." He said, good. That's the moral thing to do. And he put Indigenous rights in the Constitution. And he was the one that put out the white paper that Indian Affairs put together to wipe out all the Indigenous people's rights. And so I was involved with the elders in coming up with another proposal. That's how I first met Pierre Elliot. And I gave him the vision of the elders at that particular time, which he said that's the right thing to do. But at the same time, the province of Quebec still won't sign the document. And that's why Mulroney was so angry at First Nations people and angry at me, because he didn't want to have any credibility of First Nations. He wouldn't invite them to the opening because he put out the Meech Lake Accord, and primarily that was to take Indigenous rights out of the Constitution so that he could get Quebec's signature on the Constitution. But it was an Indigenous person that threw down the eagle's feather and said no, and that stopped it. And so as a result, he was very angry at First Nations. That's why he didn't even invite them to the opening. And he didn't invite Trudeau to the opening too. So I was able to have my own party, and then the restaurants in the downtown, they donated $30,000 worth of food It was a great celebration. And so we had a separate party where the people that actually created the project were invited to the party. So it wasn't just Trudeau. I invited Joe Clark and Flora McDonald and all the people that made it happen. But I didn't invite Mulrooney because
That's a very interesting detail, the alliance that you had with the Western Conservatives. A surprise, I think, for perhaps.
yeah, because I had the what do you call, the caucus on my side.
Right.
And so they supported me, and that made Trudeau, made Mr. Mulrooney even angrier.
Yeah, you were wily.
So then I could never be recommended by the government of Canada until
Rockefeller.
hmm?
Until Rockefeller came.
No, until our present director now.
Oh, O'Neill.
Mark O'Neill invited me back to the museum and convinced everybody that I would be able to do the history hall for him. And so he had to really make a stand for me because I was not liked by the whole bureaucracy because I created a bad precedent in having it taken out of the bureaucracy and made into a crown corporation. And the worst thing that Mulrooney didn't like was it was so successful. And of course, Pierre Elliot gets the credit because it was his vision.
Right.
And so it was all politics, you know.
Right. I have, there are a few questions that have come in from the audience, which I'd like to put to you on their behalf. One of them is also it's in the in the area of politics, and it's from John Danahy, who asks, "Why do you think your visions for the museum and the Ottawa River Islands, why were they opposed by so many conservative politicians?" But I think that you have been answering that. I don't know if there's more to it that you'd like to add.
Yeah, they primarily were against having Indigenous rights in the Constitution because it creates a real problem for the provinces.
Right.
Because the province wants to be the ones in charge of education and health and all that. And Indigenous people want their own education facilities. For many reasons, the provinces want to make all the reserves into municipalities under the provinces.
Right.
And that's what's going on now. The new colonization of our lands, or the provinces taking over all of our traditional lands and make them into municipalities under the provinces. That's what they feel is the new version of making everybody equal in this land. But it denies all of our treaties and all of our rights and everything else. So.
Rob Wright, it's not in the Q&A, but he made the observation to me that Trudeau's decision to put the museum on the Quebec side of the river was a statement in and of itself.
Yes, because see, the bureaucracy at that time was primarily English.
I see.
And everything primarily was English, and he wanted French to be a second language, really, and be able to exercise French in within the ranks of the bureaucracy.
Right.
And he wanted to have it more balanced between French and English in the bureaucracy.
I see. So I have another question. This one comes from our director of architecture, Vivian Lee, and she asks, well, she first says, "Thank you Douglas, for your intimate walk through the museum. And she says, in your design of the organic geometries of the museum, are there or were there construction anecdotes that you can share where it was difficult to marshal the trades to execute your vision? And I think you did touch on that a bit in your lecture. Maybe there's something else you'd like to add.
Well, it was a challenge to have all the exterior done in stone. There was a lot of interference with that because people were trying to go along with Mulrooney, and then having it all be sheathed, not in stone but in aluminum siding. He wanted to change. He wanted it in aluminum siding. He wanted to stone off all the floors and put lino, and he wanted to straighten out all the curves.
Yikes.
So that would be totally against Trudeau's vision.
It would be a tall order.
And he wanted no public spaces. Like, he didn't want the theaters. He just wanted exhibit halls.
Yeah.
And of course, he did not like the Grand Hall because he felt that museums should only have exhibit halls in them and no public spaces.
That's value engineering for you.
Yeah. And so it indeed was a challenge. And also, he had a minister who was part owner of a brick factory. So the Minister of Public Works decided that the museum should be brick. So then he limousine showed up, and I was ushered by the minister's chauffeur to a brick factory. And I said, which brick does the minister want? And he said, all of this brick in this that you can see that's all laid out here on the land. So I went and I looked at the brick, I picked it up and I banged the brick together, and it was a dull thud. It was reject brick,
Right.
and it was not fired properly. And but
He was trying to unload it.
Yeah, they were trying to unload it, and it was all, I had met so much. I have stories of graft and corruption from Quebec. I had to deal with them all.
Yeah.
And so, but I had the support of my Alberta caucus. So I'd go to them and say, I have a problem here, I can't approve this. And they said, you're right, you can't approve it. And
You got
so
some stone from out west, did you not?
yeah, and they would back me up 100%. And so
Right.
I got stone from out west, from Manitoba, because that's the same stone as Parliament. Parliament is lined with that stone, and I wanted to keep the same materials as Parliament. So Tyndall stone is what you see all inside of Parliament. And so I used the same stone that Parliament used, and they gave me a better price because the minister, finding out that I didn't want to use his brick, he went out and put a caveat on every stone company in Quebec, and he said you should use Quebec stone. But then what I found out was that these companies would just take raw stone and then dump it on the site and have a whole bunch of people from Quebec cut it up. And the cost of just dumping the big stone on the site was more than dressed stone cut and packaged and delivered in pallets to the site from Manitoba.
It's funny because one of the questions from the audience reads in this way. Let's see who it is, if I can say. Well, it says, Winnipeg architecture, would you please discuss your love and respect for Tyndall stone? That was that was one of the questions from the audience, or remarks, I guess, really.
Well, I could get it cheaper than the raw stone from the province of Quebec. But what I did is put all the floors on the museum to appease the minister. All the stone came from Quebec for the floors.
Right.
And so I got special stone that I had to ship to Italy to get cut because it was cheaper to cut the stone in Italy than it was in Quebec. So then I shipped the stone to Italy. They cut it to beautiful shapes, and so that I could be within the budget.
Thank you. I have a question from our former Dean Larry Richards, who really was the initiated this entire Geary chair. His question is, given your close working relationship and successes with PM Pierre Trudeau, have you been able to establish productive communication with PM Justin Trudeau on culture and architecture?
I have not used that tie, although Trudeau brought him to the opening of the museum. In fact, he and his son sat on the staircase during a lot of the exhibit because that was one of his wishes, to bring that concept of the Spanish staircase in Rome as to one of the things in the museum that he really liked. So I brought that concept, and he really liked that. He just sat on the stair and watched all the people, and then he came in for the party. But most of the time he was with his kids outside with everybody else, just sort of enjoying the festive celebrations outside. Because we had a multicultural gathering for his party, because I wanted to honor his vision. Do I have a picture of Justin?
Oh, we did have one.
Oh, I had one picture of Justin when he came across on a sunrise ceremony at the museum with his father's jacket on and in a canoe. And so I met him out there, and
But we never continued.
I said,
He never called you back.
yeah, I said, welcome to your father's vision. And he said,
Thank you.
Doug, I know the whole story.
But you haven't talked for
But I haven't talked to him
yeah.
since then.
But I think it's getting late, and I wanted to thank you so much, not only for this evening, but for the entire semester, and really, I think, a fascinating set of insights into a remarkable career and body of work. I mean, I personally have loved learning about the ways in which influences like Steiner and Wright and your own personal experiences have intersected in the in the fashioning of a really unique and remarkable career that has, I mean, tonight showing how it intersected with foundational moments in recent in Canadian history has also been eye-opening. So I really I just want to thank you very much, and thank you on behalf of the Daniels faculty and all my colleagues and all of our students and the institution. So thank you, Douglas.
Well, thank you. And I must say that I'm glad that I hung in there doing the museum, because I enjoyed updating it to a whole new history put together by Mark O'Neill. And And so I'd be happy to give a tour of the students when they come to Ottawa.
Right. Well, I hope that we're able to do that video tour and somehow fashion something from this evening and that tour together. And maybe we can have you back for an opening night when we are able to present that after all of the pandemic is put to rest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed putting this all together for you and your amazing team of people and your students. And I just enjoyed being part of your program and enjoyed meeting you all. And thank you for the honor and the opportunity of being part of your year. It's been
Thank you.
rewarding for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. And also thank you, Adoya, off screen, but thank you. And and we don't want you to be a stranger to us in the future. And so we will find ways to bring you back. And we will sign off from the public part, but we've also sent an invitation to you to maybe join us for a little after lecture gathering if you are available. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and be well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.